So, what do you want to tackle today? What's something that you think would be good for people who haven't necessarily heard of you and your work that you're doing now and the work that you used to do to get a better view, and your viewers too, to get a better understanding of what you're
Yeah.
doing now and where?
Well, it's your show, good sir, but anything. There's my experience, why I started making content, what happened, the different types of content, where I'm at now, and getting different opinions, and what I've started studying and trying, because I've just become fascinated with human behavior. That's the whole reason I read and talk to people, because I just like, why do you think the way you think? Why do you
Mm.
do what you do? And because just you sit back and you look at the world and you're like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah,
You
it's kind
know?
of weird. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So whatever road you want to take, wherever you want to start, I am an open book for you, Benjamin.
Oh, wow. Carte blanche.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see. Or you're not quite a blank slate, but you're giving me a blank check. So,
Exactly. There is
well,
no corner too dark to go into.
well, your first foray into YouTube was about what was that about?
So I was working at a rehab. Without insurance, it costs about 30 grand a month, just to put it in perspective. Like, it was nice. Like, so here it was here in Las Vegas. This place was so ritzy. We had a five-star chef, right? Like, we're talking, like, we had a gym, we had basketball courts, and most of our clients would come in from out of state. Like, I'm just, for anybody who has been to a rehab, there are not great rehabs. This was a nice luxury rehab, inpatient and outpatient. They ended up buying an old hotel here in Las Vegas for sober living, which turned into a hot mess. And they had to work out some bugs, because you get a bunch of drug addicts that are both men and women, and things get a little wild. And when you have like maybe 1/20th, like one staff member for every, no, probably one staff member for every 50 people,
Oh, wow.
things get bad. But anyways, I started my YouTube channel because I was working there, and I got sober with no insurance, no money. My mom put me in a sober living house. Thank God she paid for it. It was like $500 a month. And I just had to figure out how to stay sober, going to free 12-step meetings. So when I'm working at the treatment center and people are like complaining, I'm like, are you serious right now? Like, there are people out here in Las Vegas on the streets
Hmm.
who would kill to be in here. Like, they like I said, we had a five-star chef, and they'd be like, we have chicken like 4 nights a week. I'm like, like, I was eating ramen. Like, I had to get food stamps when I got sober. So anyways, what I'm getting at, that's why I started my YouTube channel, because I was like, well, I run groups. I, do kind of like peer support here at the treatment center. I can do free content on YouTube. So anybody with an internet connection, they can see what we're talking about in treatment. I could teach them about mental health, addiction recovery, and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I started making content, so more people would have access
Hmm.
to this stuff and all that.
Would you mind, with the aim of understanding how recovery worked for you, and then the broader question of pulling oneself out or getting pulled out of addictive and destructive lifestyle, would you mind just kind of casing through how you got into the addict lifestyle and then how you got out of it, or what?
Yeah, I will try to summarize it. But yeah, I come from an addict family. My mom was an alcoholic until I was 20, right?
Hmm.
So I grew up just hating my mom. Like, she was the type of drunk where she was homicidal, suicidal, just pure chaos. And my dad raised me. We lived in Southern California, then we moved to Vegas when I was 10. I'd go visit her for the holidays and stuff. And eventually I just said, like, I'm not going to visit her anymore, because she's always blackout drunk. And like, we're talking about her like pulling out knives, threatening to kill people, threatening to kill herself. Like, she's a wild little Sicilian woman, right? So I said, I'm like, I'm never going to touch this stuff. Like, I am not going to do it. And the one of the main issues, I think, was mental illness also runs in my family, and I never knew about it because we never talked about it. School, you never talk about it. You have health classes, they're just like, hey, here's how to have safe sex, and here's how to avoid getting diabetes and exercise, but they never talked about mental health. So I just sat there, like, with anxiety and depression, looking around at the world like, why is everybody so happy? how are you able to stay calm, right? Like people get kind of like nervous or stressed around like a test in high school, but I'd be losing my mind and obsessing, right? So anyways, after saying I'd never do drugs or alcohol or anything like that, at the end of my senior year, I went through a bad breakup. I was dating this Mormon girl who I thought I was going to marry, and that that didn't turn out well. Yeah, anyways, I didn't know how to cope with the breakup. And right after her, a girl cheated on me, and I was just like, screw it. And
Is this
finally,
senior year of high school or college?
senior of high school.
Okay.
Yeah. So like we were, me and my buddy, my best friend's Mormon, and we were like jocks and, we'd triathletes and stuff. Never went to parties. We just played video games and stuff. But finally I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to a party. I'm going to see what this getting drunk thing's all about, because I don't want to deal with emotions. And I got drunk for that first time. And it's like this switch went off, just like,
oh no.
I'm like, hey, like my anxiety was gone, my depression, like I could socialize because I used to have a lot of social anxiety and stuff. And yeah, I remember in that moment, as much as I hated my mom and everything she was doing, I was like, no wonder why she drinks. This is pretty dope. But anyways, once it started, I just couldn't stop. And I went out to a junior college. It was easy to kind of like mask your drinking. Like we'd drink before class, but it's like, hey, everybody's doing that. So I didn't really see a problem. And then I moved back to Vegas after about a semester in college, moved in with some guys who like to party and drink. So for a while, like it didn't really go noticed, but then I started losing jobs, having problems with the relationships. I was drinking on the way home from work, like in my car, and it just got progressively worse and worse. And then eventually I found pain pills, and that's when things got all bad.
Okay. A perception of Las Vegas from outside of Las Vegas is that it is just party central. I wonder, is that kind of the actual culture there, or is that just kind of like the strip or the downtown? Is it kind of just
It's both. It's both. Yes and no. Because so in Vegas, think of Vegas like a big circle, right? And it really is, because we're in a valley. It's called the Las Vegas Valley. So in the very center, you have the Las Vegas Strip, right? All the casinos, everything like that. Most of us, 99% of us, live miles away from the Strip, but on all parts of town, you'll find big, huge casinos, right? Mm-hmm. So no matter which part of town you go to, there'll be like just a rent. Like, for example, out west in an area called Summerlin, kind of ritzy, kind of fancy. There's a place called Red Rock Casino, big, they have like clubs and pool, and they always partying over there and stuff. So it is everywhere. It's easy to find, but it's just as easy to avoid it, right? Like I've been sober in Las Vegas for almost 9.5 years, and it's not like, everywhere I go, there's like parties and stuff like that. So it's as easy to find as it is to avoid. Like there's plenty of stuff to do here in Las Vegas, like if you were in any other major like metropolitan city. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I just wonder if that it's the perception of it, and then that entire culture does affect just people's attitude towards, I guess, substances or partying, maybe just broadly. If just it's just a party town.
Well, the thing, the thing I realized, like when I got sober, there's the first step of 12-step programs where it's like, we're powerless over this thing, right? And the reality is that no matter what I realize is, no matter where I go, I'll figure out a way to get really messed up. You know what I mean? Like I can turn your small podunk city into my Las Vegas. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's the thing with, the real addicts and alcoholics. It doesn't matter. Like I've, because there's something we call a geographical, which everybody does, but addicts do it too. We're like, oh, if I just move, then I'll be fine. It's my city, right? And I tried that. I moved to Fresno, California, and I found the liquor stores. I was going there at 6 a.m, right when it opened, just to buy booze to drink on the way to work and stuff. I quickly found dealers who sold me pills. Like no matter where an addict goes, we'll figure it out, right? I imagine maybe it's more difficult for like a gambling addict, because you can only gamble in certain ways. But I'm sure people in places where it's not legal, they find bookies and all sorts of stuff. You know what I mean?
So The alcohol has certain benefits and costs to it, and you were watching it kind of erode your relationships and getting you into trouble. Were the pills like a cheat on that, or did they have less costs and more benefits or something like that? Why did?
Yeah. So I thought so. The way I got introduced to them, like I dabbled, like I'd have friends who had pills and I enjoyed them. And like, funny story, when I was in high school playing football, I tore like my ACL and a few other ligaments in my knee, and they gave me pain pills. And I was like, ugh, I don't like how these feel, right? And then years later, I got hooked on them. But what happened was my son was born via C-section, so I started jacking those because the pills were given to his mom. And I'm like, oh, and so the idea was, because we like to rationalize and justify. I'm like, oh, this is better, this is healthier, this is safer than alcohol. And I did see the benefits because I didn't wake up with a hangover, right? I didn't get like belligerent. It was kind of like this chill, right? Like I could function. It wasn't as easy for people to recognize because your breath doesn't smell. You know what I mean? So in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is better. But soon after that happened, like, yeah, it was the first year, because my son hadn't even had his first birthday yet. One of my best friends / ex-girlfriend actually died from alcoholism at 24 years old. And that's when I just, again, I didn't know how to cope, and I just started doing pills and booze, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
I doubled my problem, which is also very dangerous because mixing alcohol with pills is no good. I was doing prescription opioids. Like usually when you hear about overdose deaths, it's like alcohol and benzos, like Xanax and stuff like that. But it's still just as dangerous because opioids depress your nervous system, cause issues with breathing and all that. So even though I justified pills are safer, I just started doing both of them, you know.
At any point, did you connect the dots that substances were helping you with depression and anxiety, and maybe there were like SRIs or whatever those are called, like antidepressants would be better
So
or something like that?
I didn't officially get diagnosed until after I got sober with depression and anxiety. And that's an interesting question. As much as I've been interviewed and talked about this and shared my story, nobody's ever asked me that. Like when I look back at it, I still don't think words like depression or anxiety were in my vocabulary until I got sober. Like the way I just saw it was, my life sucks, everything sucks, right? That's as far as that went. It never crossed my mind that, hey, maybe there's something wrong with my brain chemistry. Like that's when I didn't start educating myself about this stuff until after I got sober. Like it was a huge relief. I was talking with somebody the other day. She got diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, and we were talking about like this weight off your shoulders when you get a diagnosis. You're like, oh, there's a name for this. And, I've had guests on my podcast talking about like the overdiagnosis issue, everybody claiming they have mental illness and all that. So on one hand, there's that problem. But on the other hand, once I had a name for it, that's when I got prescribed SSRIs. And I've been on those for the most part of the 9.5 years I've been sober and stuff. But that was never in the conversation during my drinking and using.
And during the drug-fueled decade or however long it was, I'm just a
No, it was
sucker
pretty
for
close.
alliteration. What were you doing with your energies beyond that? Because you sound very engaged, and you're evidently very engaged in an intellectual sphere and stuff. So you obviously have intelligence and some form of ambition and drive going on. Where was that going, or what was that
So
doing?
there's this funny thing they say to people who get sober. They say there's nobody too stupid to get sober or get this program, but there's a lot of people who are too smart, right? And I always felt like I was smart. I didn't I wasn't reading like I was and everything, but I fancied myself some just off-brand intellectual philosopher. Like I look at the world in a different way and all these
Well, were
other
you pouring
things.
that into anything like writing or
No,
discussions and
just
stuff?
just my own nihilistic, terrible thoughts.
Oh no. Okay.
But the work ethic and the drive were there. Like I've always work my ass off, so I made good money. Like I actually had my highest paying job while I was in my full blown addiction. So I worked hard, worked super duper hard, and hustled, and I paid my bills and everything like that. So like I was what they call a functioning addict, alcoholic. So that stuff was there. I worked in sales. I worked in SEO, like computers, like website stuff. Like I did a lot of those things. I was, I grew up as a computer nerd, like building my own computers when I was like 10 years old. So I always been interested in that. So that stuff was there, but I was also self-medicating with alcohol and drugs. You know what I mean? Eventually, though, towards the end, like all that stuff kind of started crumbling down. Like your life becomes less and less manageable the worse things get. You know what I mean?
Is that is it always the case that people need to have a rock bottom moment or a breaking point?
It's this is. That's one of the most interesting conversations, because I've, when I was working in treatment, just for example, I was there for 3 years, and a rough number is I had over 80 people die in 3 years, right? Overdoses, suicides and stuff like that. So when I talk about rock bottoms, like I talk about like, you have to hope someone hits their rock bottom, and the rock bottom isn't death, right? Like when I got sober, I had a 10% chance of living. So my rock bottom was almost death. But then we talk about everybody's rock bottom is different. So for example, my mom's rock bottom, which caused her to get sober, was someone at her work, because she got her PhD in psychology while being a full-blown alcoholic, right? So I think that's kind of where my work ethic and functionality comes from. So yeah, she got her PhD. She started, she was working at some type of clinic or something like that, and her secretary threatened to out her to the bosses. And my mom, just being someone who worked so hard to get her PhD and stuff, her rock bottom was having her career threatened, right? Yeah. So my rock bottom, I had no plans on getting sober, anything like that. But my mom gave me an ultimatum. At that time, she was 7 years sober. And she said, listen, you're either getting sober or you're going to be homeless in Las Vegas. And homelessness, I'm like, no. All right, I'll try this sober thing, because I'm not about to be homeless in Las Vegas in the summer. No thanks, right? So it's interesting, because when I got sober and I started learning and understanding this, it helped me empathize with my mom a little bit more, because when you have a parent who's an alcoholic or an addict, it's like, why can't you get sober for me, right? Like I held some resentment towards her because she got sober for her job, but she didn't get sober for me. But when I look at it too, like my son's over here playing video games, I was playing with him. I didn't get sober until he was 3. You know what I mean? So everybody's different, and you got to hope someone hits whatever their rock bottom is. But you have issues. I often point to celebrities who overdose and die, right? Because people think that, your rock bottom has to be losing your job, losing your money, not having, but how many celebrities have died from a drug overdose and they had all that shit? You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's a tricky, difficult conversation. You just got to hope someone has that aha moment before something terrible happens.
Yeah, and with celebrities, it's got to be even more difficult, just on the level of being padded so well from reality due to if they are successful. And also, I'm sure there's a certain percentage of, or a certain amount of ego that needs to be broken down. And when you're a celebrity and all you are is ego, or if that's what's most prized about you, that can make things even more difficult.
Yeah, I often think about just the massive amounts of enabling that goes on, right? Like when you're a celebrity, you're surrounded by people where you don't even know if you have real friends, right? They're with you for the parties, the stuff. You might buy them a house or whatever, like whatever might happen, right? So what are the chances that your friends are going to tell you something that's going to piss you off, that might hurt what they got going on, right? Like how many people get laid just because their friend became a celebrity, So someone who comes to mind is like Mac Miller, right? He died from an overdose. And think about how many people were around him who were, enabling him, getting clout from him, getting perks from from doing that and stuff, doing drugs with him, right? So aside from the ego, aside from everybody saying you're so great, you go on stage, you have all these fans and all this stuff, you know. Aside from that, you also, the people closest in your life are most likely enabling you as well. And us addicts, we love hanging out with enablers, right? We don't want somebody, I don't want somebody fucking up my buzz by saying, hey, maybe you got a problem. I want to hang around with people who like to drink, like to party. My ex who passed away that I was telling you about, that's kind of what led to her passing away. She slowly started isolating herself from anybody who even suggested that she might have a problem.
This is the woman who was 24.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like so it happens a lot, and it's tricky too, because when you have an addict in your life, you have to set boundaries. Sometimes you got to cut them off and stuff like that. But at the same time, you're pushing them towards the people who are enabling them if you do cut them off. Like, addiction is a very tricky, nuanced, complex thing. And there's so many different moving parts that a lot of people don't really get, you know?
Yeah. Well, isn't there, there's like a AAA, AAA, or
I
one
think that's
for the family members who...
Oh, that's called Al-Anon.
Oh, Al-Anon. Okay. And then there's accomplices of Alcoholics Anonymous. Is there a group for enablers?
Well, there is a program called Codependence Anonymous, right? So, because what you'll find is, in a subcategory of enablers is codependence, right? So you'll have somebody like, I used to date these kind of women where they've had their own daddy issues, family issues, where they need a relationship, they need somebody, and they will feel like they're going to die if they don't have someone in their life. So if you're an addict or alcoholic, you date one of these codependents, they won't say anything to piss you off, because if you break up with them, their life is ruined. So codependency is an issue. And sometimes the addict and the other person, maybe they're both codependent. And
the addiction is like a third partner in the relationship in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's relationships are a big thing that I like when I'm helping out other addicts or anybody, you know. Relationships are a big thing, because I think a huge part of mental health is our relationships, you know, because a lot of people, I used to be addicted to crazy women for a long time. Did
you not get the talk?
You know, funny story, when my mom was sober, she was maybe 3 or 4 years sober. I remember I was drunk and I called her crying, like, Mom, why can't I just find a good woman? And her psychologist tells me, she's like, hey, Chris, hate to break it to you, but there's a good chance that since you grew up with an alcoholic mom, you're trying to find a crazy woman who you could fix. And I'm like, and then I just kept doing it anyway. But my current girlfriend, you know, we've been together for, I think, like going on 5 years now, and she's the sanest woman I've ever dated. It's the healthiest relationship, because I had to get over that weird thing I had with trying to find broken women that I wanted to fix, you know?
Yeah. When the idea was presented to you of recovery and turning your life around by your mother, what was the most resistant thing about the process of recovery to you, other than giving up that which you are addicted to?
Like, it's a funny story, and I can cuss. I can cuss here.
Yeah,
right?
We're deep enough in the episode that YouTube doesn't mind.
Yeah, when I tell the story, my mom. So basically, what happened was, my mom took me out of the hospital here in Las Vegas. She drove me to Fresno, California, to get me sober. I had no plans on getting sober. When I was in the cardiac critical care unit, my mom, she went to go get a rental car. I had my drug dealer. He owed me like $200. So I said, hey, man, I'm going to California. I have no idea when I'm going to be able to get drugs again. You owe me $200. Bring me some pills. So he came in, pretended to be a visitor. I'm in the hospital, hooked up to all these machines and stuff. He delivers me pills that I smuggle with me to my mom's house, right? And so
could we? Why were you in the hospital? Was there an ID?
So no. What was happening to me was, for months, I was, my heart was failing. So I was filling up with fluid, right? Because your heart actually, like gravity pushes all the fluid down, right? Your heart helps pump and blah, 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 right?
Mhm.
Well, my heart was getting weak because of my alcohol and drug abuse. So I kept swelling up from my feet to my abdomen. Like, as you could tell,
Oh, geez. Okay.
I'm a fluffy guy, right? My belly was like rock hard because fluid was just collecting. My legs were swollen. If you pushed on my leg, it would leave an imprint.
Oh, wow.
So what I was doing was I would go to the emergency room. I'd be like, hey, so what drug addicts do, we were like, hey, something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is. They say, are you drinking? How much do you drink? How much do you use? You quickly learn that you don't tell them or they're going to tell you to stop. So I'd go there and say, hey, I'm swollen. I'm in pain. They'd give me some diuretics to piss out the fluids, and then they would give me pain pills. So they would do that. The swelling would go down. A few weeks later, I'd go back to the emergency room, same thing, right? And eventually they're like, hey, you're kind of a regular here. Like, maybe we should admit you, right? So they admit me, and they call my mom and they say, hey, you might want to come down to Las Vegas because we don't think your son's going to live through the night. So I was 27 and I had congestive heart failure. So my heart, like, if you look at the x-rays or whatever, it was like legit the size of my lung. Like, you couldn't really tell the difference. It was so big. It was working at about
Good
20
God.
or 25%. Yeah.
Okay.
So when they discharged me, I was on, like, I'm not even exaggerating, like 10 heart medications. They gave me an oxygen tank that I had to fucking wheel around with me, like I was an old man. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, no overdoses, but congestive heart failure.
Okay. Which is, I guess it's a long-term overdose. Kind of like an arcing.
Yeah, that's when I look at drug statistics, like recently I wrote a piece for Newsweek about we had 100,000 overdose deaths, right? What people don't get
over since COVID lockdowns began, or
yeah,
just the
yeah,
last
yeah,
year?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the last year since COVID, it was like April to April. So this is a record number. Before that, we've had on average like 70,000 per year for like the last 4 or 5 years, which is a lot. It hit over 100 or in COVID. But whenever I look at these numbers, they're so skewed because, first off, coroners, medical examiners, all those people, whatever, they suck at reporting the right data, right? But there's so many things. Like, I often wonder, like, for someone like me in my situation, how many deaths are from a heart attack that were induced by alcohol or drugs, right? So we're not getting the actual numbers. So whatever numbers we're seeing have to be higher. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's important for everybody to keep in mind when we're trying to, like, figure out the scope of this problem. Is there's got to be thousands of deaths that we're not even accounting for,
Well, so okay, that's it's a puzzle to try to leap from the individual to the group level analysis of drugs and stuff. So with that in mind, just thinking of it as a social issue, let's go through your personal story, because I don't see how we change it without the person's being changed.
Yeah.
There's these statistics, but they're not really statistics. They're humans, and it's a human issue, right? It's a psychological issue. So when you're presented with recovery, your mom had already been through it. So, what were you offered, and were you given a choice on which step meeting or which kind of?
So yeah, the part where I was going to cuss. It was my 27th birthday. And yeah, the day before, what happened was she found my drugs. She threw them away. I got pissed, right? Because the thing is, Russell Brand, when he said it, I was like, that's what it is. So he wrote a book called Recovery, and he talks about how many of us addicts were suicidal. Like, I was going to bed every night with a bottle of Bacardi and a handful of pills, and I was just like, I hope I don't wake up, right? So for what Russell Brand was saying was, for a lot of us, the drugs and alcohol are the only thing preventing us from suicide, right? So when she found my pills and threw them away, like, I lost my shit. I was like cussing her out. They had a mini intervention. It was my mom, my dad. They split up when I was 4, so getting them in the same room is still a nightmare. A couple of my cousins are like, hey, you got to quit. And I was just cussing them all out, like, fuck you, right? But anyways, she had me talk to this guy because she's the clinical director at a treatment center. He's a cop. He's sober, and she got me on the phone with him because he runs sober living houses. And I don't know what it was, but he got on the phone with me, and I'm like, no, I don't want to get sober. I'm fine. Da da da. And he says, "What do you have to lose?" And for some reason, that was just the right thing to say it to me at the right time. Because when he said that, I was like, shit, I don't have anything to lose. Like I had, at that point, no job, no money, no car, hadn't been allowed to see my son in like 2 or 3 months, right? I had nothing. My friends hated me. My mom was the only person in my family who would talk to me because I'd lie, cheat, stolen, all that stuff. But anyways, 27th birthday, I finally told my mom, yeah, I'll get sober. I'll go to the sober living house. And she's like, this is the best birthday present that I could ever give you. And I'm like, why don't you go fuck yourself? So I say that because like a lot of us, when we get sober, we don't want to get sober. Like I felt like, for my first probably 3 to 4 months sober, I was suicidal, right? Like, because you get all these emotions that you've been medicating with alcohol and drugs, And, so when we ask about that individual level, there's this just fucking lottery of who's going to get it, who's not going to get it. Right. And I was lucky enough to get it. There's a lot of people. I've been on a kick for the last couple of years about how meritocracy is bullshit. And I thought that my sobriety was because I worked my ass off. But the longer I've stayed sober, the more I've seen there's so many people who have done exactly what I've done to the T. And now they're dead because they relapsed, they died, whatever. Mm-hmm. So yeah, on the individual level, I don't know. There's so many debates and arguments about what we should do. Do you arrest them? Do you give them resources? Do you do this? Do you do that? And it's like, there's no telling. I've seen people, when I was working at that luxury rehab, I've seen people who came in there from rich families. They did their 30, 60 days in treatment. They got out. Their family said, we're so proud of you. Here's an apartment. Here's a car. Your dad owns a company or he has friends. He's going to give you a job. Week or two later, they're overdose dead, right? So I can't tell you that giving someone all these resources is going to help because some people, I literally had a guy sell the car that his parents gave him to buy drugs after he got out of treatment, and then he overdosed and died. It's a very, very tricky situation we're in.
So oddly enough, I just spoke yesterday with a man, Adam, on Twitter, who was he's recovered. He's 3 years sober, and it was meth for him. Well, alcohol, and then meth, amphetamine for him. And the way that he frames how his addiction ramped up is because he was aimless. He didn't have a purpose and he didn't have a meaning. So he just he just defaulted into that. With you, it seems to be you were medicating depression and anxiety, and other people, I'm sure, use it for trauma. There's all these different ways into it, and that might determine like the ways out, and having a purpose in life beyond your own satisfaction, or having a relief from your depression, or an alternative to solving that depression could be a resource to people. But I guess, like you're saying, you don't know.
Yeah, well, okay. So if we want to break down, here's my theory, my solutions. Make Chris the president, whatever type of thing. So I'm always the type of person where I'm trying to get down to the root of the problem, right? So statistically, most addicts and alcoholics turn to substances for mental illness. So it's called a dual diagnosis. They have the mental illness and the addiction. That's why you want to treat both of them, right? So where's the mental illness coming from? There is a genetic component, but most psychologists worth their salt are looking at the biopsychosocial model, right? So there's some biology, there's some psychology, there's also the environment. So for example, there's something called the ACEs test, adverse childhood experiences, where it's trauma, right? Whether it's, physical, verbal, or sexual abuse, but also did they live in poverty? Did anything happen that could fuck this kid up, right? So that's something that a lot of people have, and those kids are more likely to struggle with substance abuse if you're the kid of an alcoholic. So one solution I have right, is parents need to get their shit together, okay? Because bad parents raise kids who are neglected or, whatever, right?
Which
But
then become bad parents that raise kids that are neglected, which
yeah.
become bad
So
parents.
my goal has been to break the cycle, right? So I had an
Yeah.
alcoholic mom. I turned into an alcoholic. My son doesn't even remember my drinking and using, right? I'm there for him. We talk about mental health. Before we hopped on, we were playing video games. We spent time together.
Yeah.
He's never seen me since I got sober, drink or use or whatever. So I'm trying to create the higher probability that he won't be fucked up, right?
Yeah.
But then where I get into my, progressive social fucking justice guy is, what are social issues creating depression, stress, all these other things, right? And I'm like, okay. So for example, there's a book that came out, but it's been in the lexicon for a while, Deaths of Despair. So these two economists, they look at it at suicide rates, overdoses, and just addiction. And so they look at how issues with our system, capitalism, just like poverty, wealth inequality, and stuff like that, lead to a lot of these substance abuse issues, mental health issues, blah, 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 blah. So that's where I look at it. That's one of the reasons I look at these social issues like, hey, people need a living wage. Maybe if we had healthcare. So yeah, like I have Michael Schellenberger coming on. He just wrote a book, San Francisco, How Progressives Ruin Cities. And him and I started talking on Twitter because he talks about in San Francisco, progressives want to just fucking legalize drugs and all these other things. And we started talking a little bit, and he's coming on the podcast because I'm like, well, I don't think that we should just hand out drugs all willy-nilly, but I do think that we do need more access to resources like mental health care. Like if you don't have insurance and you want to get sober, the first step is detox. I challenge you or anybody listening, if you get a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, call your local state-funded detox center, ask them when you can come in to detox, just to get medically stable to even have a fighting chance towards recovery. I know here in Las Vegas, we have waiting list of months, right? That's just for detox. Now, do you want treatment? Do you want therapy? Do you want to figure out why you're so fucked up and how to get better? Okay, that's an even longer waiting list. And most state-funded facilities suck. So that's where I get pissed, where people are like, we don't need to legalize drugs. We need mental health care, or we need treatment or whatever. I'm like, okay, well, we need money for that. You know what I mean? So like, I'm all for having that conversation, but how are we going to fund it? Where are we going to do that?
You jack up you legalize drugs, but you tax them heavily to pay for the detox, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, so here in Las Vegas, I voted to legalize weed. We legalize that shit. There's dispensaries on every corner, right? Go everywhere. We're taxing the hell out of it. A lot of our revenue for the state too comes from like gambling and everything. So we turn the vices into resources for the community. But even still here in Las Vegas, and this has more to do with our state legislatures, they're not putting that money in the right places, right? Yeah. Like we've made billions off of legalizing weed, and you still got to wait months to get into a treatment center. You know what I mean? So that's a whole nother issue. So once we get the money, you got to make sure that the people in power are doing the right things with it. You know?
Do you know any data with regards to Las Vegas or your state about I don't know how you would be able to tell this, but has legalizing marijuana decreased other drugs, right? If
that's that'd be interesting. I should look into that. I do know that all the dealers I know have been fucked because of it, because it's legalized. Some of them have gotten jobs at dispensaries and stuff like that. But I'll tell you one thing, that there's not enough research happening. Like you mentioned the guy who his drug of choice was meth. So you basically have two main categories for drugs, uppers and downers, right? I'm a downer dude, right? Give me alcohol, give me opioids, give me benzos, right? Like the only reason I ever did cocaine was so I could drink and use more downers, right? So what I'm getting at is, for me, never liked weed, never liked it, always made me paranoid, weird, agitated. So if I was still in my addiction, them legalizing weed probably would have had no effect. Like there were, I was a chronic relapser. There were a few times where I'm like, oh, maybe I could just smoke weed instead. I'd smoke weed and I'm like, fuck this. And I would just go find pills, you know? So that I do want to look into that data and see if there is some, but I just know that someone like me, it wouldn't have mattered, you know?
With regards to recovery, you mentioned that you were in free 12-step meetings. So there was some sort of, I don't mean this as a hard ideology, but there is a soft ideology or some sort of porous, but there is a set of rules and then assumptions, axiomatic worldview that's attached to those rules. To what degree did that in and of itself help you or build a scaffold for you to resurrect yourself or rebuild yourself?
So I'll have the conversation all day. Like there's you know, AA is a cult, AA has low success rates, all this stuff. And I've debated plenty of people in the recovery community about this stuff. Yeah. So the reality
is there always going to be some sort of ideological scaffolding for people to rebuild a sense of self and purpose and direction?
So yes and no. The best way I could relate it is like, I don't know if, you know, how many listeners are you know, religious or atheist, right? But for example, I'm an atheist. So the first thing to get rid of is that AA is some religious program where you need, like, I'm an atheist. So clearly that's false. So there are atheists. In fact, one of the reasons I got sold on the program, I met a dude who was like, hey, I've been sober for X amount of years and I'm an atheist. I'm like, oh, okay. So there is a way to work the program without developing this God belief, right? But the way I like to say it is like, think about religious people, you know, like there's places like the Westboro Baptist Church, right? But are we going to say all Christians are like this, right? There's like these crazy evangelicals, like Pat Robinson and all those other people. And we can't say this is how all Christians are. So 12-step programs, like here in Las Vegas, we have hundreds of meetings, hundreds. You might go to one that is pretty fucking cultish, right? But there's plenty of other ones that are like, do whatever the hell you want. We don't care. Like, that's my type of AA, where I'm like, listen, I don't give a fuck what you do. Like, I'm here to save my life. Whatever you do your thing. Okay. So when I got sober in Fresno, there was one place in town. I remember there was this one meeting. I loved it. Every time I went to that meeting, like I'd go in depressed, like, fuck everything. I don't want to be sober. Going to that meeting, I'd come out just like, yeah, I'd just be fucking invigorated. But then I started like hanging out and talking with the people of the meeting. And I was like, this is a cult, right? Like they had strict rules. Like they were like, if you come to this meeting, you're not allowed to go to other meetings, right? Okay. Sponsors, for example, that whole thing, sponsors give suggestions. Like, so they're like, hey, here's what I suggest, take it or leave it, right? At that one, it was like, I remember one guy was kicked out of the meeting, wasn't allowed to come back because he moved in with his girlfriend and the sponsor said he shouldn't, right? So that one meeting, that one group, very cultish. I stopped going to it. I started going to other ones. So what I'm getting at is I think there's a lot of misconceptions about 12-step programs. Well, You'll hear somebody go to one meeting with a bad experience and they'll fucking write a New York Times article or a whole book about how AA is a cult. I'm like, come on, you're talking about one meeting, you know, so.
But the particulars of that's a really good caveat that it's going to be harder or softer on the ideological front. But to what degree? So you said that there's the physical addiction that you need to worry about, and then the psychological issue or the underlying psychological issue that you need to worry about. But bridging those is some sort of talk therapy or some sort of, and I suppose, or I guess that the 12-step meeting is a way for somebody to kind of develop a narrative for themselves that gives them well, it's interesting. I was going to say it puts the locus of control back into their grasp, but at the same time, the first or second step is to say, I don't have any power.
Yeah, the powerlessness. Yeah. So here's the way I frame it, because that's when you find people who are very against 12-step programs, they jump immediately to that first step, right? So there are meetings. So there's different types of meetings, right? One of the meetings types is called a step study. You sit in that motherfucker for an hour and all you do is talk about one step, what the book says, right? It's like a oh God, since I was just saying it's not religious, but the analogy I can make is like a Bible study. All right, don't quote me on that. Let's say a book club. Okay, we go through, we read, we
But
talk.
there's one book, and it's really, really important.
Yeah, and it is the gospel. But you'll sit there and you'll break it down. So, anyways, people say, well, the step right there says you're powerless. So AA is telling people they're powerless. Here's the way I interpret it, right? Like, I live in Las Vegas. I haven't touched a drink or a drug since June 23rd, 2012. Clearly, I got some power. Clearly, I have some type of control, right? But once I drink one, once I pop one pill, once I smoke one thing, I can't stop, right? So I have power up until I take it. It's almost like in the book, in the AA Big Book, there's this opening chapter called The Doctor's Opinion, and he relates it to an allergy. And I like that because if you have a peanut allergy, are you powerless over peanuts? Yes and no, right? You don't have to eat peanuts, but if you do, you are powerless over the way your body is going to react to those peanuts. Okay. You see what I mean? Yeah. So I felt empowered. Like I felt like, hey, you can do this shit. Like, but you know, you have to be smart, right? Like something that I did in early recovery, I broke every single rule of early recovery. I went to a bar, hung out with people drinking and using, like I did everything you're not supposed to do, but I stayed sober, right? But
were you testing yourself or testing were you?
Well, one of my biggest fears was if I get sober, I'm not going to be able to have fun anymore. Okay. You know? So I wanted to be like, no, I got to see, you know, because I didn't want to, you know, there's this idea that if you get sober, you're going to be a fucking boring person, right? But that's not true. Like, I try to be an example to people. Like, I live in Las Vegas and I love, you know, well, before COVID, I love going to concerts and shows. People are drinking, people are high or whatever. I go there and I just don't. You know what I mean? I've gone to parties. Like, I have friends. Like, most of my friends are not in recovery. So what kind of life would it be if my friends are like, hey, it's my birthday or it's my graduation party from college and I couldn't go to that. Like, I wouldn't want to live that life. That was one of the things I told myself when I got sober. I'm like, if I'm going to be like that, like, I don't want to be sober. So I do have power. I do have agency. But I see once I cross a certain line, which is drinking or using. Another great example, my best friend who I told you is Mormon that I grew up with. I helped get him sober when I was about 3 or 4 years sober. He's a fucking bartender. That dude is still sober, you know? So are we going to say
still that? Mormon though? That's
No. Okay. Very not Mormon. Okay. he'd be a fun guest. No. Yeah, premarital sex, all the good stuff, you know. Yeah. Became a drug addict and alcoholic. They don't even want you drinking caffeine. So yeah, he was bad. But yeah, so we do have power, we do have agency. This is why if somebody is going through 12-step programs, I suggest like find a good sponsor, find a good meeting. Like, you'll find meetings where they don't want you taking mental health medications, you know, and I'm like, you know, I'm somebody who believes in science. Like, no. So, you know, they say take the best, leave the rest, blah, 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 blah. So it's all about giving things a chance, not thinking like one meeting or one person is representative of all of them. But with what we were talking about with like treatment and everything, here's the other thing. All the people who are like, AA programs don't work, these are bullshit. It's like, okay, if I give you that, then we have to say, open up some fucking treatment centers, because a guy like me, I had no health insurance, no money. So you want me to just say screw AA and just fucking go out there by myself with nobody to help me, no support group or anything? Like, so if I do agree with you that 12-step meetings suck, at least give us some other resources. And that's what you see with a lot of people, is that they want to talk about problems and not give you solutions, right? So until we find healthcare and treatment center where I can walk in there at any fucking time, don't have to worry about money, shut your mouth and send people to a free 12-step program.
You mentioned that your mom ended up working in a recovery center of some sort, or
yeah, she's been a clinical director since she got sober, like almost 16, 17 years ago.
And you went into that business too. Do you think that that was just because you guys got so much expertise in it, and like, well, this is what we're good at,
Yeah.
or was the kind of like a karmic debt that you felt obliged?
So hers was very purposeful. Mine was somewhat accidental. So the 12th step of the program, here's another thing. Like I will go at it with people who talk shit about 12-step programs.
I'm sorry,
So,
I'm not aware of the 12-step hate going on. So.
oh, there is a lot. There is
Okay.
a lot, Benjamin.
Okay.
That's a hot button issue for me. Like I hate it. Like the reason I get riled up is because it saved my life. You know, my son has a father in his life and everything. So when people like, oh, these suck, I'm like, mother. But anyways, the 12th step of the program is basically saying, if you want to stay sober, the number one way to stay sober is to help someone else, right? Okay, so I don't care if you're religious, not religious, who you are. That just sounds like human decency, right? Like if I became a successful business person, and if they told me the only way that your business will stay successful is if you help someone else start a business, that's a pretty good deal. Like how sick would college be if there was no tuition, right? Once you get through college, they say, listen, you don't got to pay us shit, but now you gotta help some other people coming through college. Like how dope would the world be if that was just like a thing? Well, anyways, 12-step programs, they say, once you get sober, stay sober, you do this. Like when I got sober, man, I had no money. I had like 3 pairs of clothes, right? I had no car, nothing. I had the sponsor. He would be like, meet me at Starbucks, and he would sit there with me for hours, dude, hours, going through the big book, talking with me, having me share my story. He walked me through the steps, and I'm sitting there because I'm used to hanging out with people where you hang out with me because you want my drugs. I hang out with you because I want your drugs, right? And I'm sitting there, I'm like, what's this dude want from me? I don't have shit, right? Why is this dude helping me? And, the guilt started building up. I'm like, hey, man, like he would buy me coffee, right? So not only is he giving me free time, right, that I'd have to pay a therapist however much for, and he's not a therapist, but that's the best I can get. But I'm like, how do I repay you? And he's like, listen, man, once you get this thing, just help other people. And honestly, that stuck with me, right? Like that's all this guy asked for me. That's the only thing this one dude asked for me. He's like, help other people. It's something that the whole program says in the 12th step, right? Like that's why he was sponsoring me. Yeah. But anyways, long story short about how I worked in treatment. I was working at a place called textbroker.com. If you're a writer and you need to make some extra money, go to Textbroker. You just write articles. You get paid shit, but you can make a little money. I worked for that company. I was managing projects and everything. We ended up managing a project for a place called American Addiction Centers, and they had me manage that project. I was the go-to guy, and they had me do it because I was in recovery, so I understood the field and all this stuff. So when authors would send in the stuff for me to edit, I could see if they were full of shit and all that. Okay. Well, anyways, because I worked my ass off and all that, I developed a good relationship with the person at American Addiction Centers. When I ended up losing that job, I was still in touch with them. And they said, hey, we have an opening at our Las Vegas location for an alumni coordinator. It's basically like peer support. You don't need any license or credentials. And I'm like, fuck it. And I ended up just being good at it. And I excelled at it, got promoted and all that stuff. But I will say this, when you're getting help, like a lot of people feel more comfortable with someone who has been through it, right? Like you get people who are book smart, So we had a lot of therapists they just went to school for it. They're like, I want to help people. And that's cool. That is admirable. But, when you're dealing with someone who's been drinking, using, destroyed their life, selling or buying drugs instead of feeding their kid or whatever, you want someone who gets it, So I was able to build a strong relationship with a lot of people, and they would listen to me because they knew that I knew what they were going through. Mm-hmm. So, if you're a victim of sexual abuse or sexual trauma, typically you want someone who fucking knows what you've been through rather than like, well, the book says that you should just round the nine, So, So for me, it was a little bit more serendipitous. My mom wanted to get in that field.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that expanded by you producing content. Was there like a moment where you had that, like, were you struck by an inspiration to start this
Yeah. So
YouTube stuff?
a large part of it was I wanted to help people who couldn't afford treatment because I loved doing groups, right? Because something that helped me when I was a couple years into my sobriety, I wanted to relapse because I was working at Tex Broker and everybody was going out to the bar for drinks. And this was still when I didn't really feel comfortable. And I was in this pity party. I'm like, why can't I go out and just have some drinks? So I was like, Chris, this is a weird situation. Or a weird like headspace to be in. So I just started buying books on the science of addiction. I'm like, what is different, right? So I started talking about the genetics. I started talking about the way our brains work and all this stuff. So anyways, once I started working in treatment, I loved doing groups because I knew that the science really helped me stay sober. So I would go in there and I would teach them. I'd be like, hey, listen, here's the risk factors, right? I'd lay them out, like childhood trauma, history of mental illness, whatever, all these environment. And the people were like, oh my God, right? And they loved it. They loved the groups that I would do. Kind of like when I'm talking with you right now, we'd have a lot of people come into treatment and we offered a variety of stuff. Like not only do we have therapy and all that, but you'd have AA groups come in. There's other offshoots like Smart Recovery, which is not AA related. You have other stuff. But anyways, I would talk to them like I'm talking to you, where I dispel some of their misconceptions about AA. Like they'd be like, hey, I don't want to go to AA. I heard like they shoved Jesus down your throat. I'm like, nope, So I got good at it. And once I got good at it and I wanted to help more people, that's when I started the YouTube channel. I'm like, hey, maybe I can teach people what I learned about the science of addiction. Maybe I can teach people what I learned about depression and anxiety. Maybe I can teach people about what 12-step programs are actually about, get rid of some of the misconceptions, you know what I mean? So that's why I started.
There's two levels to the internet. There's the information level where you're producing content that's informative. And then there's this tricky little thing called parasocial, like parasocial relationships where you begin to... where people begin to have a relationship with you, even though it's virtual and they're anonymous, you're not, or you're less so than they are. And uploading the group therapy onto the internet, I don't know how possible that is, but you can upload the information, right? You can't upload the information, just put it out there, and then it could be fact-checked or argued against and stuff. But if you try to go into the direction of making more connections, what are the pitfalls and the hardships or the difficulties in trying to set up some sort of group that's virtual?
So the parasocial relationships are real, especially if you get into if you're creating content around mental health and addiction and stuff like that, because a lot of people, they'll connect with you, they'll want you to save them and all sorts of stuff. And this is one of the many reasons that led to kind of my downfall on YouTube was I've lightened up a little bit, a very tough love type of guy. Remember, like for a long time, until the last year or two, I was very meritocracy based. Like, you want this shit, you do it. Like I was like the neoliberal like guy, like, hey, fucking do your thing, individuals, fuck everybody else. Like, I don't care if your family doesn't like you. I don't care if your kids hate you. You stay sober, fucking do it, right? So anyways, that had me be very good at setting boundaries. So yeah, I would dude, when my YouTube channel blew up and I was getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of views on videos, flooded with messages, not only from people wanting to get sober, but mental health, I believe, is a primary factor for addiction. A lot of people coming to me talking about anxiety, depression, trauma and stuff. And contrary to the bullshit misinformation that was spread about me, I told everybody, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed professional. So when people would come to me, I would just give them resources. I had documents set up like, here's free resources, here are paid resources, right? When people come to me, I would be like, because again, I stay sober by helping other people. So I'd be like, hey, do you have insurance? Oh, you have insurance? Here's a website, tell you the treatment centers, the therapist, whatever it is. I give them those resources. Oh, you don't have health insurance? Here's SAMHSA, right? That's a government website, shows you all the state-funded facilities. I would just hand out resources to people. So I'd set up boundaries for those parasocial relationships. Eventually, what I did was I started setting up groups so people could talk to each other, where I tried to be very hands-off, you know, because I got sober in 12-step programs, and I believe that their model is very good. Just one person talking to another who gets it. So I started a Facebook group. I started a Discord server. Like, for example, on Discord, we had a channel for addiction. We had a channel for depression, for trauma, for whatever. People can go in there, talk with other people who got it. Same as a Reddit forum or whatever. So that's what I was doing to set up those boundaries. And so it didn't get too fucking whatever.
For it to not get too fucking whatever for you is one thing, but what we see a lot of on Tumblr, on Reddit, on all these different forums are people not even knowing that they're doing this, but begin to congregate because they have mental health issues, and then creating some pretty wicked spirals. And then there's a lot of different social movements that attract traumatized people or people with different personality disorders, and so on and so forth. So with that in mind, and if you could like go back or restart that work, or if you're counseling somebody who wants to set up resources, group resources specifically for people on the internet virtually to meet up and to cope or to figure out how to deal with these issues together, what are some of the boundaries that need to be kept in place, and what are some of the ways in which a crazy ideology cannot capture like this matrix?
Yeah. So, you know, it's funny, and I have to bring it up. So I was on the other day, Embrace the Void had me on his podcast. We kind of talked about it. He's like, and I was telling him, like, you know, I was canceled. And he's like, is it really canceled? It's not really like that woke ideology. And I was explaining to him, there is an entire mental health addiction group out there that is following the same playbook as that woke ideology, right? Where what they say is the gospel, you can't counter it and whatever. And this is kind of what you're talking about. It starts feeding into each other, blocking out outside information, no nuanced discussion. Yeah. And that was another thing that got me fucked up on YouTube, because so to answer your question, what would you tell people? Tell people to be very transparent about who you are, what your education is, all this other stuff. But the reality is too, we know, like, something I'm very passionate about is explaining that you can't always trust experts, professionals, whatever, because how many doctors, like, look at COVID, right? How many doctors during COVID have been spouting bullshit, right? There's plenty of good ones. There's debates within the community about vaccination, masks and stuff, which I think are important. But you also have people who have a medical degree, a medical license, that spew bullshit, right? Like hey, just because you got a doctorate or a medical license doesn't mean you can't also have mental illness or biases or whatever, right? So yes, there are the people who are unlicensed and uneducated. They need to be transparent about it. We need a lot of humility, right? For the professionals, like, you will find a lot of licensed therapists and psychologists on. Sometimes I watch them, I'm like, you are spreading pseudoscience. You are spreading stuff that isn't proven, but they will speak of it as it's factual, right? Yeah, okay. So something that got me in trouble plenty of times and had the mob come after me was telling them the truth. There is a very controversial disorder, which I think that you and your audience will appreciate, which I will call bullshit, which is dissociative identity disorder.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Previously known as multiple personality disorder.
Yeah,
Go
now
on
it's called
YouTube.
DIDS. Kids, yeah. TikTok, it's a big thing now.
Oh, yeah.
They're naming all their different personalities.
Like, let me tell you, if you're able to make content and say, my alter does my makeup, my alter does this. If mental illness was easy enough to control that you could make YouTube content and make a full-time living, I would turn my depression off whenever I needed to, right? People would turn their trauma off. But we're supposed to believe that dissociative identity disorder is the one disorder that is just fully controllable, right? But anyways, if you look into the literature too, there's more evidence against it and how it's bullshit. If any of you want to watch a great docuseries, it's on Netflix. It's called, I forgot, but it's about this guy. He was a serial rapist, right? And then he claimed he had multiple personality disorder. And he was just a con man, right? So anyways, what I'm getting at is I got into a bunch of trouble for saying, hey, this is bad science. This isn't real, right? And for other things too. There's a conversation around ADHD medications, me coming from the addict world, knowing people who have been hooked on Adderall and Ritalin, I'd have the ADHD subset coming at me and say, don't fucking talk about medications. Hell, when I'm talking about opioids and opioid addiction, you get the chronic pain groups coming at you and say, hey, you're making it harder for, you know what I mean? So you have groups who will deny the evidence of everything else just to protect their group. You see this with the political arguments too. And that's really how I got from being mental health and addiction guy to starting a podcast where I'm talking about politics, woke ideology, all these other things, because it's everywhere. No matter what topic we're talking about, you will find it, right? I'm a vegetarian, right? There are fucking insane people. My girlfriend and I, we love to look in the Las Vegas vegans group on Facebook because people in there will be batshit insane, So I think that, and again, I'm fascinated with human behavior. It's everything. It's all the same candy, different wrapper. Doesn't matter where you go.
Well, okay. That opens up the conversation to a broader question about how to avoid becoming culty, how to be aware of a cultiness. You said it's in everything. What is that thing that's in everything? It sounds just like some sort of American puritanical fundamentalism. It's just kind of, we have a lot of those kind of people, or maybe they just thrive in certain identity groups. And by identity groups, I mean every sort of thing, from vegetarian to Asperger's to whatever.
Yeah. My opinion is it's this combination of a few things, right? Ego, right? So you have whoever's at the top, the people at the top, and all this stuff. You and I, when you were on my podcast, I could talk about people on Twitter who create a certain group or whatever. So there's whoever's at the top, but then you have the people in the group. There's loneliness, right? Like, I still need to listen to your episode that you just released where you're talking with a guy about incels, right? Like, I get it. Like, these incels, they're fucking lonely, whoever, and they find each other and boop, you have this cultist-like mentality. So if you get lonely people, when they find their group, tribalism just fucking kicks in, right? Because once you get into that group, once you're finally accepted, you don't want to piss that group off. I don't want to disagree with you. I don't want to go against your opinion. Now I'm kicked out of the group, and we don't like that, right? Okay. So you have the people at the top, and then you have the group at the bottom, and it's all kind of feeding each other. The person at the top, whoever that person or people are, they're incentivized to keep that going, right? Oh, I got a bunch of people following me. I got a bunch of people watching my videos, and here's what I did to do that. So I'm just going to keep doing that, right? Yeah. Like I had a background in sales. I worked at car dealerships in the service department. The boss would say, hey, we have a bonus this month for tires. We'd sell the shit out of some tires. Next month, hey, we have a bonus going on for brakes. Sell a shit ton of brakes. So if I make a certain type of content that gets a lot of views, traction, and if it gives me some money too, I'm going to keep creating that. Meanwhile, the people within that group are all agreeing with each other, feeding each other. Hell, I if you turn on a live stream, we're both on YouTube. You start getting super chats. So there's a money incentive, there's an ego incentive for the top. There's the connection and tribalism and group mentality at the bottom. That's kind of what I see.
Is there? This kind of, it's a stupid question because I kind of maybe I could phrase it so it's less stupid. Is there a way to disrupt? If insofar as one wants to be successful in the business of content creation, is there, and taking into account that there's this parasocial relationship, and then there's the intra-parasocial relationship with regards to the followers and the groupies and that stuff. So is there a way to disrupt and still be disrupt the coldness, disrupt the insularity, but still be able to be successful, whatever you define that as. Is it not ethical to try to disrupt that, or?
So I think it's hard. This is something I spend a lot of time thinking about, right? So I'm just going to use you as an example and pick on you. But yeah, when you were on and like I talked about your tweet and you just retweeted it too, where you talked about them saying racist, right? So, but we had a conversation about we know what will get the engagement. Right?
They did that though. As soon as the Kyle Rittenhouse,
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not disagreeing with you, Benjamin. I'm just saying, we as content creators, we know what's going to work. We know, right?
And we have to push the button.
Yeah, and I look around. Like I think I mentioned it about your buddy James Lindsay. Fucking love his book with Peter Boghossian. And I had Peter on. We talked about it. That book saved my ass when I was getting canceled. It's how to have impossible conversations. It helped me learn about epistemology, try to understand what the other person's thinking. Why do they think that way? How'd they get to it, right? So the book, phenomenal. But in the public, like it doesn't work. Like, have you found just an influencer or a high profile figure who is just very balanced and in the center? Fuck no. We love stuff that's going to piss other people off. We love people who retweet others and call them stupid and all these other things, right? But then you can also disprove this by finding people who only tweet happy shit, right? They only make happy content. There's a whole just field of people who are just the happiness gurus, right? Just motivation. Go on Instagram, those accounts that have like millions of followers and just tweet the dumbest shit about, happiness and all this other stuff. So it's almost like you have these people who just us versus them mentality, and then you have the people who are unrealistically optimistic.
Kumbaya.
Yeah. So you have like it just seems like you have to be extreme for it to work. So how do we break it up? I don't fucking know, right? Yeah. Because we love the extremes, like whether it's extreme talking shit. Yeah. Yeah, like whatever it is, or the extreme just happiness and everything's fine and everything's la. Like I used to be really into mindfulness and meditation, and eventually I was like, you guys are a little like, hey, there's some shit going on in the world, and like we can't just be like, oh, it's just how I perceive. Like, no, sometimes things are fucked up, and we got to acknowledge that. So it's a difficult task. And I think one of my goals, just having conversations, and, I write a lot on Substack. I just wrote a piece this morning where I'm like, hey, it starts with us. It starts with us just kind of knowing that I tweeted that we need to come up with a new term called confirmation bias porn, right? Like we love shit that agrees with us. Like you show me something I agree with, like you and I
baby, affirm my priors, please. Harder.
You and I we talked about libs of TikTok. People fucking get off to that account. Yeah, those libtards. Ooh, I'm gonna like it. I'm gonna share it. I'm gonna show everybody. But then what I was writing about too is on the left, you have the people who like, look at this fucking Trump supporter. They think that the earth is flat and fucking they take horse dewormer, whatever it is, right? And we just have a little circle jerk thinking about how dumb other people are. And so it starts with us and just realizing that we do it, and the world's a little bit more complex and nuanced. And that's what I think. Humility,
self-awareness, tongue-in-cheekness, irony, reading skills, intelligence. And then also you balance your content with, so you grew this huge thing, well, fairly big thing. And then you left it alone, and then you're rebooting things in a completely other mode of being. So could you explain what your content is now and what you're doing and where you hope to go with it?
I'm trying to figure out what my brand is, even though it's been like fucking 6 months. So when I got canceled on YouTube, there was a few things I was interested in. One of them was crowd psychology, right? Why do people act so irrational in groups? If you go YouTube, The Rewired Soul, you'll see a bunch of videos about me saying all these things, right? I think the number one video with over 1 million views is like the fake therapist, right? So I'm somebody who's never claimed to be a therapist. You won't find a single video, nothing, no clip of me ever saying that. But anyways, I was like, so I started thinking, I'm like, what makes people believe information even though there's no evidence of it? Right. And I started getting into crowd psychology and just realizing, and I was like, okay, crowd psychology. Then I started reading books about tribalism. Then I started reading books about human irrationality. Then I started reading books about political polarization. There's some great books on like Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. There's a book called Moral Tribes. There's a book called Moral Politics. I started realizing that a lot of our conversations and debates and arguments and hatred come down to morality. I got really into moral philosophy. Anyways, what I'm getting at is I started reading like a lunatic, just trying to understand the world. And I had a lot of thoughts, ideas, and questions. And I started a podcast. I'm like, I'll have the authors come on. I'll talk to them. I was like, even if nobody listens to this, I'll just, ask them. And, one of the things I love about listening to your podcast or your YouTube channel and your conversations is that curiosity, because I'm like, why do you think like that? Like I had John McWhorter on. I'm like, what's your experience as a Black man who has been very successful? You're a fucking linguist, right? Which, who does that, And now you're talking about wokeness. Like, what's your experience like? What have you seen? What are you seeing on the landscape? And I wanted to understand him, right? I've had people on. I had Celeste Headley on, who wrote a book called Speaking of Race. I don't think her and John McWhorter would agree on a lot of things because her thing is talking about racial issues and all this. I had an author on who wrote a book called Social Justice Parenting, So whoever I'm bringing on, I'm trying to understand what makes you think this way? What's your personal experience like? How big of an issue do you think this is in the world? But I also bring on a lot of like psychologists, scientists, experts, just because I think some other shit's interesting too. I'm really interested in psychology, some science, depending on what it is. I had an author on who wrote the book, Some Guide to White Supremacy, right? So I had her on, and I was like, all right, talk to me about white supremacy. How big of an issue is this? Because I think, so part of what I'm doing is I'm bringing people from all over the place, trying to understand, have these conversations. I feel like my emotional regulation is somewhat okay, where I can have a conversation. Like I had Charles Love on. We disagree on a lot of things, but we had a very good conversation, So I want people to see that that's possible. I want people to get inside the mind of someone else, I'm hoping to maybe do my part. I also want people to read some fucking books. Like I can't tell you how much I can't stand people who judge a book. Like someone's writing a book you've written books. I've written books. That shit takes forever. And for someone to read a synopsis or read the title and then judge it, I want to, I was just talking about emotional regulation.
I know.
I want to kick them off a roof, I'm like, are you serious? Like, I remember when Steven Pinker's book just came out, right? That book was on the shelves for 5 minutes and people had entire reviews about how shitty it was. And every single one you read was on the introduction. It didn't quote anything past the introduction. I'm like, come on. So I want people to read more. I want people to get a full view of what someone's thoughts, opinions, and everything like that are before you judge them. Because I think that's the only way to give somebody a fair chance to see who they are and what they really believe. There's a lot more nuance than just this black and white shit.
Yeah. So we already know you game with your kid and that you do a podcast and that you're working within the recovery field. What's something completely orthogonal to all that stuff? What's something, a hobby, something you do with your hands or something that you do in the world that you
recently
really
I've been building a shit ton of Legos.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like pre-designed kits, or do you
oh yeah,
you
yeah,
just have
yeah.
piles of them and then you're like,
no, I'm not that cool. I'm not like Lego Masters kind of like because my son, he got into Legos. Like that's the cool thing about having a kid is that you can start brainwashing him to get into the shit you want him to get into. So I got him into Legos. I got to just watch him. He's a gamer, got him into gaming. We see all the Marvel movies. But I was always like, fuck, like I get jealous watching him. And now like Legos coming out with more adult Legos, right? So here, hold on. Can I get on camera? Yeah. So you can't. Can you see? So like this is a Boba
Boba
Fett.
Fett. It's really
Yeah,
difficult to
it's
see, but
all fucking blurred. But anyways, so they have like a
yeah,
helmet collection. I feel
yeah.
like I can be an adult and do that, but since I've built all the helmets and I wanted more, like I just built the Ecto One. Shit was massive, right? It's like this big, and so yeah, so Legos.
What's the Ecto one? Which one is that? Is that Boba
Uh,
Fett's
no,
vehicle?
Ghostbusters, the little
Oh,
station
oh,
wagon.
okay, okay.
Yeah, it's gangster, right? The doors open, this little seat comes out. But yeah, I find that nice and relaxing. I can hang out. My girlfriend and I will be watching something. I always got to be doing something,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
like I can't just sit and watch a movie or TV or whatever. So I'll have to be doing something. So I'll like build a Lego, and she'll be like watching and playing on the phone or whatever, or doing
yeah.
homework. She's getting her master's in social work right now, so she's kind of
Oh,
in the mental health space too and stuff like
yeah.
that. So
Will you? Do you think you'll do master's degree work or something like that?
so
Do you have to?
I tweeted out the other day about how dumb I am because I know how important it is that you have to get like a degree in something to be like valued in this society, but I think it's bullshit, so I just don't do it. So I don't know. Maybe like I might. Now that I've since starting this kind of new path with interviewing authors and stuff, I've really gotten back into my writing. I'm working on my next book right now. I've self-published. I might pitch this to authors. I don't know. I'm not authors, but publishers.
Publishers. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if I want to get back into like doing it for work, like helping, because like for example, I can go to a 12-step meeting, I can help somebody, I don't got to get paid for it. It's something I can do where I'm not like obligated. Because let me tell you, I work for the largest treatment center chain in the country, and it's all fucked up. Like that's a whole nother thing. Like they're very money driven. It was like just pack as many clients in here as you can, and so that's part of it too. So I
Yeah.
don't like if I ever did, like my girlfriend, she talks about maybe doing a private practice. If I ever did get licensed and go that route, I'd probably want to just do it for myself. But it's I can make content. The books I've written a book, Rewire Your Anxiety. It's about scientific evidence around what helps with anxiety, some of my own experience. I've written a book about addiction, a book about what you can do if you know somebody who's an addict. So I found other ways to help people, which doesn't require me spending thousands of dollars and years of my life. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? But it's difficult because there is the credibility factor where it's like, well, you don't have the license behind your name. But if I could tell you, if I could even tell you how many therapists I've seen fuck their clients, you wouldn't be so hard up about uh
Well,
degrees
once you
about,
start to lift the skirt under these institutions that are accrediting people, you see some pretty ugly warts
yeah.
in there.
So there's just this weird idea that, oh well, since they went to school they must be ethical and moral as well. It's like, nah,
Yeah.
so
Well, Chris, it's great to have you on. Return the favor, but I think that I got more out of you than you got out of me. But I don't know. We don't have to.
I always
We don't
get
have to
plenty
do a
out of you, Benjamin. Just see your
measuring
beautiful
contest.
face.
Oh, thank you. It's actually just the whole setup, my studio setup. It's getting pretty. I'm getting pretty fly. I'm pretty proud. Where I'm almost done
Just sitting
where I
in the
am.
abyss.
Oh yeah, I guess so. I'm kind of floating on the abyss, like Beethoven in that one movie with the Gary Oldman.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time. Thanks for the work
Yeah.
that you're doing and for visiting with me and giving your experience to my audience.
Yeah. Anytime, man. Anytime.